What is the fate of the Shining Stars? That's the question everyone's been asking lately ever since the last few chapters of Eden Zero. Witch, Hermit, and Sister are awesome characters that we've all come to love, but it's starting to look like they might not be around as long as we'd like them to, especially considering there's been plenty of hints for a new generation. So in this video, I'm going to discuss the fate of the Shining Stars and explain why they're all going to be replaced. Be warned that this will contain spoilers. Before I get started, make sure to comment with your thoughts on the Shining Stars. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment goes to Illustrious Elucidation for sharing their thoughts on Dr. Stone. If you'd like more Eden Zero and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Now, before I even say anything about a new generation, we obviously need to acknowledge the fact that 2 of the original 4 Shining Stars are now dead. Valkyrie, of course, died trying to find Homura's mother, and Witch died protecting the Eden Zero, an absolute tragedy that I am still very much mourning over. And even in the very slim chance that Witch is somehow brought back, cause you know, time travel is a thing, it's undeniable that the Shining Stars as a whole are on their way out, both literally and figuratively. See, when we first met Witch, Shiki was told that he would need all of the 4 Shining Stars in order to break past Dragonfall. Of course, we, as the big dummies we are, bought this line up until Witch was like, oh, I was just speaking figuratively. At that point, it should have been pretty clear that the 4 Shining Stars weren't absolutely essential to the Eden Zero. The only thing we do know is that, as Witch explained, authorization from all 4 of the Shining Stars is required to unlock the Etherion. Which, now that I mention it, I guess Witch never explained that to Homura, huh? I'm sure Sister or Hermit will end up explaining it. Point being that until we learn more about this whole Etherion business, there's really no guarantee that the remaining Shining Stars will stick with us for the rest of the story. Now, at this point you might say that Hermit and Sister still have important roles to play as the healer and programmer, and so they'll be kept in the story in order to fulfill those roles. But even this doesn't really guarantee anything. Remember, the 4 Shining Stars fulfilled their original purpose when Ziggy called an end to his journey on the Eden Zero. After that, everything they did was their decision. Valkyrie was the Sword of Edens, but she passed the job on to Homura, who eventually decided to replace her mentor. Now, I, like many fans, thought being the Shield of Edens would be a necessary part of the team too, but apparently Mashima disagreed. Still salty. Anyway, Witch is gone, but we know that Eden Zero is gonna move on along with the story, so clearly the crew will be just fine without a shield. Unless, of course, someone steps up as a new shield. Which brings me to my next point. Since the Shining Stars' only real purpose was to serve Ziggy, and since it's obvious that they're not absolutely essential to Shiki's quest, it's reasonable to assume that their purpose in terms of the narrative is to prepare the next generation. To be clear, I don't think Mashima necessarily had these exact plans from the very beginning. In fact, Mashima has admitted that while he does plan out the story of Eden Zero ahead of time, he ultimately waits until the storyboard to make certain final decisions. But it's undeniable that he's always had the idea for a new generation of the Eden Zero. In Chapter 19, Witch tells Pino that she is the next generation after listing off the original Shining Stars. The way she mentions a new generation right after the old generation suggests that the new one will step in for the old one. Then in Chapter 29, when Sister mentions Pino to Witch, she immediately assumes that Pino is part of the new generation. It's almost as if the original stars themselves already know they're going to be replaced. So then it seems pretty clear that even if they decided to join Shiki and help him out on his journey, they always knew they'd only be helping to form this new generation. And up until now, they've acted according to this belief. Valkyrie obviously taught Homura how to be a badass samurai girl before she decided to be the new Sword of Edens. Witch trained with Rebecca so she could become a Chrono Witch. And like I said, Pino has already been revealed to be the Light of Edens. Which brings up another interesting point about this new generation. One would think that the new generation would consist of the same roles of sword, shield, mind, and life, but apparently the new generation isn't exactly wed to those jobs. I mean, maybe the Light of Edens could be the new Shield of Edens to replace Witch, but Light is about as related to shields as it is a mind or a life. Plus, we have to consider the fact that Clean and Jin have already dubbed themselves the Winds of Edens. Which, by the way, a bit bold of them to just make up their own job titles. The law student in me wants to tell them, look guys, there's an application into hearing you have to go through before you can just start giving yourself titles all willy-nilly. But that's beside the point. The point is that we're already seeing a new generation with completely different roles and titles that might even consist of more than just 4 characters. So the idea that Valkyrie and Witch will simply be replaced and everything more or less will go back to the way it was is pretty unlikely. We're probably going to have a new generation that learns from the old one but is entirely different. So then that just leaves us with 2 more questions. What is this new generation going to look like, and does it have room for Hermit and Sister? And Witch if blah 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 time travel stuff. Well, let me go ahead and start with the second question. Honestly, even if Hermit and Sister are on their way out, I just don't see them leaving in the near future. I mean, with Valkyrie, Homura was literally right there, and as much as I love Witch, the crew can survive for the time being without a shield. But Sister and Hermit have 2 of the most important roles on the ship. First of all, there's nobody else that can serve as a healer. Obviously, the crew can find a new one, which, by the way, I can't wait to see the reaction when that happens. But until that happens, I just don't see Sister leaving anytime soon. Especially considering how messed up these villains are and how easily our favorite characters seem to get shot or lose limbs. Then, of course, you have Hermit, who acts as the programmer, a huge role for the team that consistently comes in clutch. I mean, come on, it's a science fantasy, you gotta have somebody who knows how to push all the buttons. Although, unlike Sister, Hermit does have a sort of student in Wise. And considering the insane utility of his ether gear, it's not the least bit crazy to think that he could fill in as the programmer should anything happen to Hermit. At the same time, Wise isn't exactly as skilled as Hermit, and there's still plenty of secrets about the Eden Zero that I'm sure only Hermit can unlock. So for the time being, I don't see her going anywhere just yet. Meaning that although we are in the midst of a new generation, Sister and Hermit will probably be sticking around for a decent amount of time. But that brings us to the next question of what this new generation will look like. Now, I know I said the new generation might not have the same 4 roles as the Shining Stars, but it seems like each of them except for Sister already has a replacement. Like I said, Wise is most definitely going to become the new programmer for the ship, regardless of what that superhero fanboy decides to call himself. Then we have Rebecca, who trained directly under Witch to become a Chrono Witch. If she decides to take up Witch's old job, then Rebecca would be the one responsible for protecting and maintaining the Eden Zero, which, is pretty easy when you can hit rewind on the universe. But even if she doesn't, I could just as easily see Rebecca as the new Witch of the group while somebody else takes over the maintenance duties. So when you consider that Homura is also serving as the Sword, then it's pretty safe to assume that this new generation will look somewhat similar to the Shining Stars. But there's plenty to suggest it's going to be bigger and better with entirely new roles. Jin and Clean have dubbed themselves the Winds, which if I'm being honest just sounds like more swords, but we'll see. Then we have Pino as the Light, but as of right now we have no idea what that means besides the fact that Ziggy had plans for her as part of his new team. Obviously her EMP ability can make things easier for the others, plus seeing as how this seems to be a major plot point, I can only imagine the Light of Edens will play a big part in the quest for Mother. But moving deeper into the realm of speculation, it's pretty safe to assume the new generation will include even more members. There's the strong possibility of Laguna, who's already been redeemed and has been shown to be incredibly useful. I'm not sure what his role would be beyond helping out in fights, but I really hope it's more creative than the Winds. After that, we have Couch Po, who Mashima seems very inclined to keep in the story, so it'd be no surprise if he gave her a reason to continue traveling on the Eden Zero. Although she doesn't have an ether gear yet, so what she would actually do is unclear. She could get some kind of cooking ability that allows her to heal people, but that's just my pet theory. Now, those are just the 2 characters who are already on the ship. We still have plenty of story to go through, meaning many more characters and tons of possibilities for new crewmates. Which is why it only makes sense that the Shining Stars as we know them will inevitably be replaced. Of course, they'll stick around for a while and their skills will more or less be replicated, but with all of the foreshadowing and massive potential, it's only a matter of time before the Eden Zero is completely taken over by the new generation. And that's it for this discussion. If you enjoyed this discussion, then make sure to like the video. Also make sure to comment with your thoughts down below. And if you'd like more Eden Zero and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.